really fabulous to see people and be able to, you know, connect with one another in these real difficult times for sure. So thank you for making the time for this. With this webinar, we're going to be talking about and sharing with one another about how to teach active bystander intervention. So this is, we'll be talking about what's happening now and the increases in identity-based harassment that folks are experiencing in this moment. And I'll also be sharing with you the history of where our active bystander training came from, how we developed that, and run through some of the curriculum with you. I do have a PowerPoint that we're going to link in the chat so that I'm not going to use it a whole lot, but if you want to be looking at it with your screen, you can feel free to do that because you'll have the link right there. Okay. Does that work for folks?
Yeah.
Great. Yay, thank you. So to get started, we started in Prevention Action Change, which is my organization in Maine, in Portland, Maine, and I'm also the mentorship coordinator for ESD Global. And in Prevention Action Change, we started doing active bystander training as a separate training. It's always been part of our empowerment self-defense work, but we first used it as a separate training right around the time lead up to the 2016 election in the US. And there was a surge in harassment and violent attacks on people based on their perceived identities at that time. And there was also the formation and organizing of the Women's March. And so as women and folks supporting women were organizing from Maine to go down to DC, they really wanted some tools and skills to use in those perceived or potential incidents that might happen in the Women's March, whether that was a local march here or in DC. And so we designed this at the time 2.5-hour program that was building off of both empowerment self-defense elements and what we were doing already in protest skills, conflict skills, de-escalation, assertive communication, boundary setting, all those things that we all already do. And I also gained some background in bystander intervention and those tools from my work in a university system. So as we started to put together the curriculum, I also reached out to the Center for Anti-Violence Education in New York City, in Brooklyn, and also to Lauren, who's here today, Lauren Taylor, to riff off of some of the work they were doing with both Safe Bars program and in separate active bystander trainings. So it grew from that, and then our local high school, one of our local high schools, the students there experienced a racist attack at a bus stop. And they called us in to do active bystander intervention training with the entire school. So 400 students, it's a relatively small high school. And that just developed it farther. And then over time, we've been presenting this as a separate 3-hour training all over our state, to community groups and to the public and to churches and you name it. We're presenting it all over the place, middle schools, you know. So that's what I'll be sharing some of those pieces of today. And we start out, so I'm going to run through some pieces of the curriculum. And really, if you have questions as we go along, either raise your hand physically, I'll probably see that, or if you ask a question in the chat, Bayan will see that. So either way, we'll get your questions answered. And also I'd like to point out that Bridget, can you wave your hand? Bridget is also a member of our team at Prevention Action Change, and so she can also answer questions about the active bystander curriculum. One of the things that we start out like any of our empowerment self-defense classes. So we give an overview of the class, talk about the goal of the class, and the goal of active bystander intervention is to increase the safety of the person targeted for violence. Let's do a call and response to
Well
ground
done.
ourselves, center, and keep going. So stay unmuted, folks. And this is a call and response we use. It was developed by the students from that high school that I was saying we worked with. And so wherever you are, let's take a deep breath together. Let's breathe in and sigh it out. Take it out. All right. And I'm going to say a line. This is developed by high school students to give themselves the energy, the focus, and the commitment to respond to situations for themselves or for others. And I'm going to ask you to repeat what I say. So the first one is, I deserve respect.
I deserve respect.
I am strong.
I am strong.
I am valid.
I am
valid.
I am valid.
I deserve support.
I deserve
support.
Support.
I have feeling.
I have feeling.
Right. And a loud one. I have a voice.
I have a voice.
I will use my voice.
I will use my
voice.
My voice will be heard.
My voice will be heard.
I can create change.
I can create change.
Because I am strong.
Because I am strong.
I belong here.
I belong here.
here.
You belong here.
You belong here.
And looking at someone else on the screen, say, you belong here.
You belong here.
And again, you belong here.
You belong here.
Together, we all belong here.
We all belong
here.
Give yourselves a clap. Woo! All right. Nice job, Diane. You get the prize today. Thank you, everybody. So, moving along, as we do, we deal with things, we keep moving. We start out, as we do with a lot of our empowerment self-defense classes, with a community agreement. And along with the things that you would normally have in a community agreement, the learning stays and the learning leaves and the stories stay and that kind of thing, we also include a short one that's ouch, oops. And the reason we include ouch, oops, and what that means is that often in practicing these skills, we may find things that we've said that we didn't know were offensive to others. And so it's like learning a new language, and you're going to make mistakes. And so we ask people to enter this with that understanding that people are trying and practicing and going to trip up. And so if I say something that lands wrong with someone else, I ask that they acknowledge that and say, you know, ouch, that landed wrong, or what you just said then, whatever it is. And I need to respond with, oops, I'm sorry, I will try and do better. So that ouch, oops, right? Or if I realize it myself and I don't know whether it landed wrong with someone, I'm just going to own that, right? Rather than making excuses and blaming people and all that, we're going to own it. We're going to move forward and commit to making a difference. So that's one addition to the community agreement that we include. Then we go right into identifying or talking about what is identity-based harassment. So does anybody want to take a stab at that? What is identity-based harassment? Just give us a thumbnail sketch of what you think that is. Yeah, Wendy?
Well, it could be racism, it could be homophobia, it could be because we're women, it could be body shaming, it could be,
Yeah,
any of
so
the things
good
that
examples. Yeah.
don't fit into what people think of as the norm.
Right, so that's an important aspect. So it really is harassment based on who you are or who you are perceived to be, right? So it may or may not have anything to do with your actual felt identity. It's more about that perception And it can be based on all of those things that you mentioned, in addition to class or age or immigration status. The list is very long. So one of the things we point out about identity-based harassment is it is not new, right? This is not something that's new. It's been around forever. But it has been on the rise in recent years. And in this country, we can draw a straight line to the change in leadership that happened in 2016 and some of the language that the president uses. So a lot of those things they could be a single bias, as they call it in the statistics, a single bias attack based on sexual orientation, based on racial identity or religion. But more often that it is multiple identities, right? So that's why we see those intersections of people with multiple identities being targeted the most and experiencing the most violence. So there's lots of statistics out there. And, sometimes when we're doing a training in a big school where we have PowerPoints and whatever, we'll use some of those statistics and get them up there to get people on the same page about what we're talking about. With the active bystander, what we mean by that is really anyone who decides that they are the person to step into a situation where there's harm occurring, right? So that's an active bystander. Some groups call them upstanders, and we'll talk about their roles. But the goal of active bystander intervention, as I said, is always to increase the safety of the person targeted. There's a perception that you got to wear a cape, that you're confronting the harasser, that you're stepping in, you're stepping between, you're doing some kind of big, powerful thing. That is not what we teach, because oftentimes that can be escalating of the situation, which can decrease the safety and increase the harm to the person who's being targeted. So we'll talk about those distinctions. We sometimes in the class will do a section on microaggressions, and we can't always fit that in, but I want to talk about that here. So that's one of the building blocks of raising our awareness of what people are facing in the reality of dealing with identity-based harassment. So does anybody want to give a quick thought of what a microaggression is? And there's lots of definitions, so it doesn't have to be exact. Just what are you thinking when you hear the term microaggression? What do you think of? And since I can't see everybody, just unmute yourself if you want to share something.
Hi, to me, they are those little small insulting things that happen along the way. They can be in the form of a joke or a quick remark, but in some ways they're basically undermining in some way to a lesser or greater extent.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. Anybody else? And Wendy, I'm just going to call on somebody who hasn't spoken yet. So if anybody else wants to share on that.
I guess I would say, to me, microaggression is even like, sometimes it's just one word. Everything seems okay and someone slips in one word or even a look that changes what could be a neutral or positive conversation to like, hey, wait a sec, what was that? Might not even see it right away. It just might be something that leaves a bad taste in your mouth afterwards. As you're saying, what did that person mean by that? Were they trying to insult me? Was it intentional? That wasn't very kosher.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Leon. And that's really important, that it's both not always intentional and often not noticed by other people. So a quick definition that we use, it's on the slides, but we use it, it's from a researcher by the last name of Sue. And it's microaggressions are brief, commonplace, daily, verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, intentional or unintentional, slights and insults which communicate hostility toward people based on their social group membership. So that's key. It could be anything, right? But that it communicates hostility to the person receiving the microaggression, right? So when we talk about that, we go straight into an exercise. And what we do is we take lots of pieces of flip chart paper, and we post them all over the walls. And each flip chart will have a title that's microaggressions based on race, microaggressions based on sexual orientation, based on gender identity, based on age. When we're working, and we'll have a couple of examples on each page. When we're working with just groups of adults, certainly where there might be cisgender, older white men in the room, heterosexual men, we are sure to include age and class, because those two things are places where they can find themselves. And if someone in the room, if everyone in the room can find themselves somewhere in these microaggressions, then it helps them to build empathy for what other people are experiencing. So we always include those two. And the exercise is people go around the room and they just add from their own experience, they add to all of these sheets. And you really find huge, long lists of the types of experiences that people have based on these many, many different factors. And you can tailor it to your group. But we've found it's a really great way to bring forward experiences, to have those experiences then voiced in the room, so really affirm their experiences. And then we'll talk about the impact of microaggressions, so how these things can layer, and you can give an example from your own experience based on whatever issue or really excuse might be the reason you would be targeted for a microaggression. So that's something that we do as an exercise that really, I think, engages people in the work and helps them to kind of become present. And as I said, to develop that empathy for what other people are experiencing. So then we go into, that kind of lays the groundwork. What is identity-based harassment? What are microaggressions? Let's get involved. Then we go into a section that's all basic empowerment self-defense. So we start with that voice call and response that we already did, and that's from Casco Bay High School in Portland, Maine. We'll give them a shout out. Then we'll do a face, voice, body exercise. And we'll talk about things like how being assertive, how our social conditioning can create barriers for our feeling comfortable being assertive. That could be for myself as a female identified person, someone who's read as female. When I act assertively, people think I'm being aggressive, right? That's doubly, at least in this country and probably a lot of other countries, that's doubly the fact if I was a Black woman, right? So how you're being read based on what other people are perceiving about you. So we talk about those pieces of assertive communication, and then we practice them. So we'll do the exercise that's familiar to probably everyone in this room, which we call stop lines, where you're using your face, your voice, your body to stop someone who's walking towards you. So that's a practice piece. We do some grounding and centering after that to help people to, manage their own adrenaline. And then we'll do what we call one-liners. So someone will say something that's a boundary crossing phrase, and you respond with a boundary setting phrase. And then we'll do a couple of scenarios. So some of those scenarios we can do together, and we'll read a scenario very short, and we'll say, what could you say that would call this person's behavior out, so name the behavior. B, call this person in, so engage them in being part of the solution. And C, support the person who's targeted by them. So let's say we're in a business setting and someone makes a comment that is racist. So anybody who wants to unmute, what's something you could say, actually everybody unmute, what's something that you could say that would name that behavior in the moment? So you're at work, someone makes a comment that is you perceive as racist. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing, they're not using the N-word or something. but it's something that you want to call attention to and name the behavior. What could we say?
I don't think that comment was appropriate.
Okay, let's say that together. 1, 2, 3. I don't
think that comment was appropriate.
Great.
I
Thank
think
you.
that
What's
was
another one?
that wasn't appropriate.
Okay. Okay.
That wasn't appropriate.
That wasn't appropriate.
That wasn't
Right.
appropriate.
That
Something
was appropriate.
What's something we could say that would call the person in? So make them part of the solution.
Ask a question. How do you think your comment affected the person you said it to? So if someone used a racial slur against a Black woman named, I don't know, Rachel, you would say, you said something not so nice about African descent people. How do you think Rachel felt about that?
Okay, and that depends too on whether this person, Rachel, is in the room, because that's up to her, whether she wants to be engaged in that way. But calling attention to the behavior, as you're saying, I don't know that you understand the impact of what you just said. Or I wonder if you understand the history behind that phrase. Can we talk about what is meant by that phrase or how that phrase impacts people? You're opening, those are opening phrases that call the person in to be part of the solution. What's something you could say directly to the person targeted, whether in the moment or after, that helps them, that might be supportive or sound supportive to them?
This is Ashley. You could say, hey, I saw what happened. Is there any way that I could support you at this time?
Beautiful. Thanks, Ashley. And thanks for saying your name as well. Beautiful example. Another one, what's something supportive we could say?
I think, hi, this is Tamar. Even if it's something that's kind of smaller, a sentence of, wow, that was awkward. How you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Just something short.
Yeah. How you doing? That was awkward. That didn't feel okay to me. How are you doing? Yeah, that check-in. So all of those things. So you can practice a lot of these in this call and response kind of format in a large group, and it really gets the words into people's mouths. They have said them. They're much more likely to say them in a real situation. So that practice is really, really important. Then we'll do a milling exercise, which is people just moving around the room. And it's a silent exercise. And I got this from the Center for Anti-Violence Education, but I think it's something also a lot of us use. They're moving around the room, and I'll say, point to an exit, and then keep moving. Point to something a particular color, something another particular color. Something you could throw as a distraction, something that you could use as a shield. Point to all of the exits, those kinds of things. And then we always end with someone you could ask for help. And then we do it again and again and again. So point to someone else you could ask for help, and someone else, until it lightens the mood and everybody realizes, all these people are around me who could be helpful to me. So that's an awareness exercise, again, to get people in the space and to develop that bit of spatial awareness around what are the risks around me, or what are things that could be used in a harmful way, but also what are the assets? What are the things around me that I could use to create safety? We then go into a small group discussion, which I think is really an important piece. And again, this discussion's on the slides, but we're asking people to share with their small group what are some things that they have seen or experienced. What are some pieces of identity-based harassment that they have either witnessed or experienced? Did anyone intervene? If so, what did they do? If not, what do they wish someone had done? And so you're not just, because most times people don't intervene, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about letting people share, having people share their experiences, and also getting that positive piece of this is what they could have done in that moment. So that's a good sort of 10, 15 minute discussion. And as the part of the debrief, we're talking then about what are the barriers to intervention and what are the things that make it possible to intervene. So some of the barriers might be, we talk about the bystander effect. Got muted. Okay. The greater the number of people, the less likely it is that anyone will intervene. There's some research behind that. The diffusion of responsibility, which is where everyone's watching something and expecting someone else to do something. And if no one's doing something, that maybe it means I'm not reading the situation correctly, those kinds of things. So you want to bring in a little of those bystander research there. But also talking about the things that make it possible. So I need to intervene. I need to have the eyes to recognize what's happening. So if I'm not aware of the type of harassment experienced by LGBTQ people, for instance, then I need to do my research. So I'll be able to recognize it when I see it and be able to intervene appropriately. So that's a really good tool for getting out some of that information and for really helping people to start getting into that active sense of what I can do. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint at this point. Some people have it up on their screen, some people don't, but I'm going to share it because I want to go through what we call the 4 Ds of active bystander intervention. Now, I didn't develop these. I don't know who did. It's one of those things that's been developed over time. There are a couple of organizations who are trying to take credit for it, but that's not okay because they didn't develop them either. I know Lauren has experienced this as well. So we, some use 3 Ds of bystander intervention, some use 4, whatever, but I'm going to share the screen and let's talk through them. So here we go. I'm going to click down to, you can see all this stuff is already in here. Now the 4 Ds. So we used, the first one that we use is direct. So that's either direct with the harasser or direct with the person targeted. So with direct with the harasser, we're talking about these pieces, using all of your ESD skills to diffuse and de-escalate the situation, to avoid confrontation. You can use some of the pieces that we'll also use with the person targeted. So with the person targeted, you might pretend to know them. Well, you might share race, gender, baseball cap, whatever, with the harasser as well. So you could also pretend to know them. So these are some really effective tools that we're giving people knowledge around, and then they'll get a chance to practice with scenarios. So with the person targeted, providing that presence, ask what they want, how you can help. Is it okay if I sit with you? Maybe you can engage them in conversation. I know some kids, some high school students on a bus who just engaged another high school student who they didn't actually know about math homework. And that interrupted what was happening. So you're looking for opportunities to interrupt the harassment. That's a nice little clip that we sometimes use. And so the next one would be delegate. That's getting other people involved, telling bystanders what to do. Often, at least in this country, we refer to first aid training because that has this piece of how to get other people involved. Talking to some authority figure on a bus, it might be the bus driver, another authority, a trusted person. If it's a police, I will only personally call the police in this country if there's physical harm happening and I cannot intervene or other people can't stop it in some way. But if I call the police, I will stay to describe to the police what's happening. I'll use what the privilege I have of being white and talk to the police about what's happening, because they, as we know, come from the same socialization or more than the rest of us, and so may assume, let's say the person being targeted is a person of color, they may assume that that person is the harasser or the aggressor in that way. So super important to stay and engage with that. particularly if you can't check in with the person targeted first. I always want to ask them what they want me to do, but if they are being attacked, physically attacked, then I might call the police if needed, but I'll stay. So that's some pieces to think about in how to delegate. All right. The two last ones, distract and delay. So distraction could be anything, you know, pretending there's a crisis, dropping your coffee. We do a lot of protest training, so that's why we have protest in here. You know, again, creating some kind of distraction, some kind of something going on that doesn't have to do directly with the behavior of the harasser, but it's more about just intervening and interrupting. All right. And then that delay. So I think a lot of people don't think of delay as active, but it really is. There's a lot of times when people can't intervene in the moment, but after the fact, you can intervene, or you can check in with the person who was targeted. You could even check in with the person who did the harassing behavior, assuming you know them. Reach out to some other resource. There's lots of ways to assist in these ways. So super important to think about that last D, delay, as very active. And then recording the incident. You know, if you see 25 people already recording the incident, I think you can probably think of something else that you could do that would be effective. But some points about, you know, videotaping the person causing the harm, not the person who's being targeted. And then, of course, check in with the person targeted before posting it or submitting it to the police or anyone else, anywhere else. There are a number of other places to report harassment, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is also on this PowerPoint, not just the police. All right. So I think we'll go back to our group. Yeah. Okay. Hey, everybody. So how many people were familiar with the 4Ds already? Was that familiar language to a lot of folks? Some people yes, some people no. Okay. Where we take it from there is we go right into practice. So we'll give people scenarios and we'll get them into small groups, and their challenge is to come up with some action under each of the 4Ds. All right. So you actually are able to come up with a number of different ways to intervene. And I'm going to read out a couple of the scenarios that we use, and you can adapt them for, you know, what's happening in your moment or in your location. These are all incidents that have happened in Maine. A lot of people use national scenarios as well, taken from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Department of Justice. Use situations that are real. Use situations that people will, if they don't relate to them, then that's actually good, because it opens up their awareness of what other people are dealing with. Okay. So I'm going to read one out that's very common. And I'd like to, folks who haven't spoken yet, if you want to give, let's say, an example of a direct intervention, either with the person doing the harassing or the person being targeted, and you can just unmute yourself when you have a suggestion, say your name and say your suggestion. So here's the first one. You're in a store. The white clerk reacts angrily when the person of color in front of you in line gets to the counter. The clerk says she doesn't want to serve any damned blank space there, and they're all lazy and getting state money, etc. What can you do? How can you help? So what's something direct that you could say to either the person doing the harassing behavior, which in this case is the clerk, or the person who is being harassed? What do you think there?
Hey, it's Kim.
Hey,
I've
Kim.
got some. I think calling it out right away, and even suggesting a different store that they could go to, just to align with the person who's experiencing that. Call out the clerk and say, that is completely inappropriate. You have that is uncalled for. It's, you know, and turn to the person who's experiencing that and offer to say, you know what, I know a much better store. Let's go there together where our money would be much better appreciated.
Awesome. So thank you, Kim. Thinking about that, thinking about directly addressing the clerk and then addressing the person targeted in a number of ways. And we'll talk about sort of the subtleties of this in a minute, but any other suggestions as to what somebody would
I might,
in this moment?
this is Anne. I might also just say, you know, that was really inappropriate. I'd like you to page your manager, like bump it up a level, or, you know, just so someone with greater authority can that store can have an opportunity to be helpful.
Great, thank you, Anne. Justine?
So I was in a very similar situation to this, and the clerk at the grocery store had a woman in front of me with children. She was Black. I live in a place where there's not a lot of people of color. And she said to the customer, she said, well, I'm going to help the next person first. And I was horrified, and I said, no, thank you. And I looked at the woman in front of me, the customer, and I said, you have every right to be helped next. You were here longer, and my kids aren't with me. I really appreciate, you need to get going. So I didn't escalate the situation. I didn't draw more attention to her. I just refused to accept what was being offered.
Thank you, Justine. That's really an important point, because we want to be careful when people are experiencing identity-based harassment, right? They're oftentimes do not want more attention brought either to them or to the situation. It just, escalates the stress of the situation. And think about, so checking in with the person, like doesn't seem like that's okay. Or I'm happy to say something on your behalf if you want me to, check in that way. And we also, I think, haven't addressed whether this person who's being targeted may be standing up for themselves just fine, right? They may have all of the assertive communication, boundary setting skills that we could possibly offer, and they may be dealing with it just fine. So in that, we may go to another level, right? Or another tactic. In that case, we might be saying something after the fact that would be supportive to them. So what might we say that's supportive to the person who just experienced some significant harassment? Let's see, somebody who hasn't spoken yet.
This is Sharona speaking. I just wanted to say that one thing you could say to support that person is, I'm so sorry that happened. It shouldn't have happened, and I'm here to help.
Yeah, thank you, Sharona. That's key. What about something that we could say or do after the fact? Let's say the person deals with their transaction, they move through, they've stood up for their own rights in that situation. And, our ability at that point would be to intervene with the store, right? Whether that's direct with the clerk, as some folks said, direct with the manager, even, going to another level of making some complaints about that store. What we want to be careful about is if we post things on Facebook or other social media that we're not posting someone else's experience. I know that's happened here where someone did not intervene in the actual situation and then posted about it as a bystander, posted about it on social media. And the person who was impacted said, well, if you were there, why didn't you step in for me? Why didn't you say anything at that moment? So really, I think particularly as if you're someone who's not generally targeted, then you may have, you may step in with fire to fix this, right? And take away some of the rights and control of the person who's being targeted. So being real conscious of that, I think, is really important. we have a number of other ones, but I also want to make sure that we have time for people's questions. So one that we always include, I'll skip to that, is a scenario that happens in a bathroom. And so you're in a public bathroom. Someone is at the sink quietly washing their hands. Another user seems upset and says to them, "You're in the wrong bathroom," and then "You need to get out of here," and they're escalating. So we use that because it happens a lot where people are targeted if they're non-binary or they're misgendered in a bathroom situation. And it's not something that, it's something that a lot of people who are heterosexual, cisgender, et cetera, don't necessarily have the eyes to see. So we always include it, doesn't matter where we are or who we're training, that one's always in there. And I got it from folks off of a Facebook question. So some of the things that people come up with to intervene in that situation could be just asking someone to pass the soap, you know, or pass you a paper towel, intervening by just creating a little bit of a distraction. Some people use humor, like, "Hey, we all got to pee," you know, something like that. Other people will pretend to know one or the other person. Certainly waiting for the person who's being targeted, staying in the bathroom as long as they are to be a presence. So whatever you say or do, stay with them, and then checking in with them afterwards. So I think when I asked the folks who have experienced this what they most wanted, they said really they just wanted to get the heck out of that bathroom as quickly as possible, and that it would have been great if someone had ever said to them, "I'm sorry that happened. That's not okay. You know, what can I do to help?" Or "How are you doing in this moment?" Something. But of the people that I spoke to who had experienced that, no one had ever had someone intervene for them in that situation. So those are some of the, realities of what people are dealing with. And I know on our Facebook page, I just posted a New York Times article about Chinese Americans and other Asian Americans or people who are perceived to be Asian experiencing a huge uptick in verbal and physical violence in these times. And so that's, we really need to be aware of what's happening around us and really build our tools for that. So we end this 3-hour program with talking a little bit about post-action responses. So if you step in as an active bystander, expect that your system's going to have a stress response. So you might shake, you might cry, you might laugh, normalizing those responses for people. And then we just end with what we call a yes circle, which is something we've taken from Impact, where everyone shares something they're taking away. So that's the overview of our 3-hour curriculum. We've done it in different chunks at different times. But I'd love to take the last 15 minutes and just answer questions and, what are other people doing with this kind of material? So let's just open it up. There's a lot of people on the line, so I can't see everyone at one time. But if you can raise your hand, and we will come around, or just unmute yourself and ask your question, particularly if you haven't gotten a chance to speak yet. So we'll start with Justine, so I see your hand, and then other folks just jump right in.
So my question has to do with calling the police. So this comes up in my 10-week course frequently, where we'll have a discussion about, well, when is it appropriate to call the police? When is it not? What happens if you can't check in with the person who's being targeted? And I've had women who have such a strong response. So one student who is transgendered, and she was almost crying, and she said, "I don't care if I'm being physically hurt by an attacker. I don't want you to call the police because my likelihood of being murdered is going to increase." And I've had other people of color who say, I feel almost as strongly. And then the whole class is nervous, like, well, how do we interpret this? And I've shared, like, well, if I can't intervene and there's physical harm to you, I don't know what else to do other than to call the police. So to hear that makes me feel very insecure about how would I handle this. Do you have any advice, Clara?
You know, that's certainly the reality for so many people, right? I have recently, this was not a case that involved a transgender person, but it was involving a Black man verbally and physically assaulting a white woman. And she asked me to call the police, and I did, but I stayed. And so that was that piece of making sure, and I was calling 911 and they're asking for the description of the person, and I'm like, oh God, you know, so I had to be just being very, very conscious about how I described this person and being very clear that there was no weapon and all of those things, and then just staying. But it's absolutely the reality. So that's really, and if anybody else has another way of dealing with it, but that's my one thing. If you're gonna call, you have to take the responsibility to stay all the way through. For as long as the police are there, you have to stay.
And Ms. Claire, this is Ashley from Impact Safety.
Yeah.
We teach our finished response, because at one point we did have it where it was look, assess, call 911, and now we do switch it to look, assess, go get help, just because of those same purposes. So I think just having your participants practice, get it in their bodies to go get help, whether that is a person that's nearby, a business owner, just calling attention to someone else so that there is additional people around, I think could help fill that void of some people that automatically want to call the police, because even if you do call the police, you still have to wait for them to come anyway, versus you have more people rallied, at least the person that was being attacked or hurt is safe and feels supported in the midst of the action that occurred.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. That's really important. Appreciate that. Absolutely.
Hello, Clara.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. This is Vikrant. I just wanted to ask you something, in active bystander intervention, don't you think there should be a physical component on the module? Because places where the law enforcement are not strong, waiting, the police reaction might be too late, and there is a risk of physical attack. So don't you think there should be a physical component on how to defend oneself when you do an active bystander?
No, we've made the decision not to include that beyond boundary setting, physical boundary setting, using your face, voice, and body, and using some de-escalation techniques. We've made a choice not to include that in the active bystander class, simply because it takes longer to learn. And we're trying to make sure that we're trying to encourage people to make choices around their intervention, which are the safest choices, both for them and for the person being targeted. So even though I have some examples of people, stepping in between two people on a subway or something like that, just stepping in between and eating potato chips. There's actually a whole video of the potato chip guy on the New York subway. He just stepped in and ate potato chips, but he was a very, very large man. And so he had the physical size and presence to do that. So we really avoid anything that's confrontational. Now, that doesn't mean that what you say or do couldn't cause an escalation, right? And so we always have an active bystander component of our empowerment self-defense classes, and we encourage people to take the empowerment self-defense classes. So, certainly those are just our reasons, and people can make other choices, because I certainly see your point. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Clara. Thank you for this great webinar. I have a question regarding partner violence. If you're witness to something happening, are there other things to consider, or is it all the same parameters that we've talked about so far?
Right. I think the other parameter, and other folks chime in here too, the other parameter is that the person targeted, this is not a single incident, and it is likely to continue, if not to escalate, once they're out of your sight and home or what have you. If it's perceived that the person who's targeted for abuse, that they somehow encourage you to step in some way, then they're going to experience more harassment and abuse later. So that is probably a situation where that distraction technique is the best one. I remember there was a class that Jay Spiro taught at one of the special trainings for one of the summer camp programs, and she taught an intervention which was about your lost dog. So just intervening and asking for help, and really being very agitated about your lost dog and intervening and just saying, can you help me? Can one of you come with me? I mean, really doing something that interrupts the behavior, but is not about the behavior, I think is an important piece. That's a super, super challenging one. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up.
This is Zoe. I would definitely second that distraction is definitely going to be better than a direct confrontation, because it will almost certainly be perceived as being the survivor's fault, because of the mindset of the person who's perpetrating that kind of coercive, controlling harm.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. Thanks for bringing that up.
Clara, this is Anne. I'm wondering if you do any scenarios around people being violent towards their children in public.
Yeah, actually, we have included a supermarket scenario. And we don't use we haven't included physical violence in it, but we have a scenario where a parent is verbally berating their child in a supermarket. And it's interesting because often people who have children will find empathy in that. And probably having come to their wits' end at various times in their lives, and find ways to intervene by showing that empathy, like saying to the parent, oh, parenting's super hard, or these are stressful times, or complimenting the child, that, oh, your child's super cute, and can I help you reach that, or asking them to reach something that's not judging behavior or judging comments, because when people feel judged and they feel shame, they actually can, in some circumstances, then become more violent. And similar to the domestic violence situation, the child may feel the repercussions of that shame once they're out of the store. So anything that interrupts and helps to shift the energy a little bit will be helpful in that situation. Yeah.
I have spoken to Wendy, but I just have to tell the story. I was in Germany one time, and there was a man and a woman, and he was at the point of getting physical, I thought. So what I did is I just stepped between them, and I accidentally hit him with my elbow in the ribs, and turned around and said, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I hope I didn't hurt you. And created that distraction in that way, that also let him know he was, I had so much fun. I mean, it was really fun being able to hit him without, which I don't advise unless you can handle it. But it really did distract and break the pattern. And that also, she sort of said to him, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine, macho man. And that it just blew away all that crap.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, and that you're good to point out that you have the physical skills to back that up. So not a choice that I would encourage in general, but yourself, who you are, what you bring to the situation, and that's a really important thing to also stress in these trainings. Let's say if I'm an extroverted person, then I'm much more likely to create a scene or pretend I know someone by, coming in with a joke, or, oh my God, I haven't seen you in so long. How was that graduation, reunion or whatever? As a more introverted person, I'm much more likely to check in with the person being targeted or do a delay giving people the option to do something after the fact is often really liberating. Like they
I think
didn't
it's
realize that
also-
that is an active thing. So,
And I think no matter what, if you can ask permission before you do something, it's imperative. You
definitely.
don't jump in. But in this case, it was, I saw he was on the verge of hitting her, and I
Right.
didn't have time to check with her. But I think that asking permission of the person who's being harassed or assaulted or targeted is absolutely paramount.
Right. Sergio, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you ever do a brainstorm or a mapping of safer authority figures. These issues with police aggression and vulnerability of people of color and non.
Yeah, we
people.
do, thank you. We do under the delegate and also under reporting. So under delegating, depending on your audience, there's going to be lots, let's say it's a workplace, there's going to be lots of different possibilities. And the same thing under reporting. So you might have lots of possibilities there as well. But that's a really good one. Just like, you know, working on the tell finger of the 5 fingers of safety, that's a super important piece. Yeah. So I think we're right at time, but thank you all. You've got, there's a handout and there's the PowerPoint, but you know, be in touch with me if you ever have any other questions. My contact information is at the end of the PowerPoint. And it's been super being with you today. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. And I'll talk to you on
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really, you're like,
Thank you
really like the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.